All right, it's still Africa Business Radio. Winston and Rachel still rocking with you on a Friday.
That's right.
Getting ready for a super interesting weekend. And yes, looking forward to that. And it's time for our great conversation, which you will learn a lot from. Just like we told you earlier, we'll have a guest coming through. But what are we even talking about? We're talking cultural and creative industries, CCI. Now, this is big because this is something that has literally empowered a lot of young people.
True.
It's created a multi-billion-dollar industry all over the world. But specifically in Africa, it is needed for so many reasons, even as we continue to appropriate our culture and make the most of it and project it, and also generate revenue for the African continent. So pretty much cultural and creative industries, we're talking about creatively producing and distributing culture through industrial means, right? So applying creativity of groups, individuals, just, using original cultural product and appropriating it the right way while also generating revenue. So you can look at examples like television, film, music. So and that's, again, brings me back to what I said about empowering the young people and creating a massive industry for a lot of young Africans to thrive. All right. So that said, we have an expert who will be joining us in a minute. Yeah, we're blessed to have Teddy Roux, who is the manager at ESPartners West Africa operations. All right, so Teddy Roux will be taking us through cultural and creative industries. As a professional, as an expert, we get to hear from his angle. We ask him a lot about the system, the status, a whole lot of things. Trust me. So you want to stay here and get a professional angle into cultural and creative industries, how you can tap in, how you can do what you can as a young African. So
I thought about it when I saw this topic this morning, and I thought, there are a lot of corporate businesses that are involved in the creative industry.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have music, the arts, we have design, we have architecture.
Even radio.
True. And they also have to, season it with technology. And so there's always the question of sustainability when it comes to the creativity of the artist or the founder, especially because you're a corporate business. So I'm hoping that, we'll have Teddy give us answers to these questions.
Absolutely.
And more, hoping that he can hear us right now. Good morning, Teddy.
Hello, I can hear you, yes.
Perfect. Good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. So yes, just for backgrounds now, what is, a creative ecosystem? What can we say falls within the boundaries of cultural and creative industry before we get right into our conversation?
Well, thank you so much for the question. So we've been learning a lot about it and basically how to tap that industry potential across the continent. So just as a statement, I've been learning a lot and hoping to share when we started engaging. So what we do at ESP, I guess what I was saying first in introduction is, full disclosure, I'm not a CCI expert. It's at ESP, we basically provide what we call intelligent capital that we define as the right mix of technical assistance and capital to high potential entrepreneurs across the continent. And we realized that there was quite a bit of potential within the creative and cultural industry, and that's how we embarked on that journey about 2 years ago. The question that you ask, it's extremely important one. What falls within the boundaries of cultural and creative industry?
Yes.
First of all, it's not a new concept. When we started doing the research, apparently that term was coined in 1948. That they started talking about the cultural industry. Now, the industry should be basically encompass like many subsectors. So it's a very broad term. So it's defined basically as sectors of activity whose main goal is the creation, development, production, reproduction, promotion, distribution of marketing of goods, services, and activities with cultural, artistic, and or heritage content. So as you would see, that's a pretty large definition. So within that CCI, you'd basically have audiovisual, fashion, design, gaming, animation, visual arts, arts and crafts, music, architectural heritage, editing, scenic art, culture, all the way. Some people would go as far as including like tourism. So, and then what we've learned is that the definition can also be like country specific. That depending on on the national level on the scope and needs. Like some countries would have a different definition. So it's not an easy question, but I guess we started on the premises that it's all activities that involve sort of like creation, development, production of things that are related to cultural, artistic, and or heritage content. And then that would involve like multiple subsectors and multiple channels also.
Okay, thank you very much, Teddy. Also, another very important question is why is this important, especially from the perspective of entrepreneurs and the overall impact it could have on African economy?
Listen, the impact is actually huge. So, and in particular, and I'll get back to this in the times that we live in, i.e., this COVID time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, well, CGECI falls into what we would call like knowledge-intensive industry based on creativity and talent. I think it's the president of the Afreximbank that actually Afreximbank launched a $500 million facility to support CGECI across the continent. That said, Cote, that was back in January last year, creative industry can be important vehicles for more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive growth strategy for African economies. So it's an industry that matters. I mean, that in terms of, I guess, as African nations, we do have the potential. I mean, that's no question there. The main sort of like challenge for us, and that's something that's very key to our art and what we do at ESP, is how do we transform that potential into prosperity? So it's an extremely important industry in terms of direct, indirect, induced effects, in terms of revenues, in terms of exports. I mean, I think as it relates to Nigeria, I mean, the numbers vary, but the forecast export revenues for 2020 were close to $1 billion. That's something that we've read. And then I think beyond the actual economic potential and the fact that it could be a huge catalyst for job creation, which we all know is, I wouldn't say an issue, more of an opportunity across the continent. There's also this whole notion, I heard you guys talking before I actually joined, as a way, as a catalyst to preserve and promote our cultural heritage.
Right.
All right, now, so 2020 came with a whole lot of changes for every single industry. For some industries, they had to make really good changes that saw them really skyrocketing. For some others, they had to make changes that saw them really, dwindling and going down. But here we are into 2021, and every single industry is still trying to stay afloat. So talking about the cultural and creative industries now, what is the current state of that industry in 2021?
Again, it's an excellent question. I mean, if you were to ask me, I think it's an industry that's way below its actual potential, and that has been hit by the COVID. I mean, again, COVID it's pretty much like all industries across the continent. I think if you look at specific subsectors of the CGECI, it's even worse. I mean, all the folks within the sort of events, music value chain. I mean, let's think about like the entire value chain, and I'll get back to this. So I think it's an industry that has been hit significantly. However, I'd like to look at this from a more positive angle. It's still an industry that has a tremendous untapped potential. So basically, when we look at the state of that particular industry, there are a couple of challenges. I mean, first of all, at ESP, we like to use data. I mean, we firmly believe that in absence of data, we only have opinions, and the data are a little bit scattered. I mean, we've been involved in the industry for 2 years, as I was mentioning, and it's not easy to get actual reliable data. So that's something. And again, part of the reason is that you were asking about the state of the economy. Unfortunately, as with many sectors in our countries and across the continent, significant chunk of the CGECI is still highly informal. So we're talking about like highly informal economy that has been hit by COVID. However, again, I think we ought to look more at the bright side and the CCI recent trend. I mean, if we, in preparing for this interview with you guys, I mean, we just looked at recent news in the industry. I was actually yesterday with the head of Universal Music for Africa.
Oh, right.
I mean, there's just so much going on. I mean, people are paying attention. People are taking notice, and there's actually a lot of money flowing into the continent for that industry. So, highly informal industry hit by the COVID. However, there is clearly an untapped potential. There's a lot of talent, and I think our challenge is basically, again, is how do we transform that talent into actual prosperity? How do we put the sort of like eye into creative and cultural industry?
Right.
All right. So let's talk about current policy approaches in different African countries now and these individual creatives. A lot of persons would argue that there is some sort of mismatch, a problematic mismatch between current policy growth approaches to growth in the creative industry and the intentions and motivations of the individual creative practitioners that actually dominate that sector. And I know you've had to work with a whole lot of them. So do you think this is the case? Is there a mismatch?
Sorry, Perry, could you rephrase the question?
Is there like a mismatch between current policy approaches across the African continent, you know, when in terms of growth in the creative industry, and then the intentions of the individual creative practitioners that actually dominates the creative sector?
So pretty much for like a clearer picture, policies across the African country, for example, that are implemented by the government, you know, does it stifle growth? Does it aid growth? Is it in line with the intentions of the creative practitioners in Africa?
Yeah.
Again, excellent question. Thank you so much. So I think, first of all, we ought to look at this at the country level. So I think if we look at the issue at the continent level, there's definitely like a push and an appetite. I think institution, I mentioned the Afrexim Bank. I think the African Union is also pushing that agenda. So are the big multilateral institutions such as the African Development Bank. So there seems to be a push at the continental level. When it comes to country specific, I guess all countries are not created equal in their support to the ICC industry, to the CCI industry. Sorry, I'm using the French acronym here. If I was to look at most countries that we've looked at over the past 2 years, looking at the policy level, my honest assessment is that there actually clearly is a mismatch between the potential and the level of support that's provided to that industry.
Right.
And I mean, we can talk about it further, but when you look at the issues and our challenges related to laws and regulation around like intellectual property, what's being done to support the industry, and by this we can go back to this intelligent capital approach that we've called at ESP. But how do we make sure that we basically have the right level of technical support? I mean, the right environment, the right level of financing to support that industry. I'm not sure that we're there yet.
Right. So that brings us to you and the platforms you represent. What is the role of ESPartners in all of this? You know, how do you intend to aid, you know, better support, you know, better chemistry? How do you intend to aid the industry, and how broad is the range or scope that you cover?
Thank you for the question, Michael. So basically what we try to do at ESP, as I mentioned, our vision is basically to support over 1 million entrepreneurs across the continent. And we realize, thank you so much for the question around policy, because what we do, we use a sort of like push and pull approach. Okay. So we have a strategy consulting practice that works at different level of government and leadership. To basically make sure that we have data-driven agenda that supports policymakers and leadership putting the right sort of like policies in place for certain industry to thrive. Right. So there's like that agenda that we're pushing. Yeah. At the same time, we're also trying to support directly entrepreneurs through intelligent capital. So what we've done in Cote d'Ivoire. Recently, I'm based in Cote d'Ivoire, so we started with the pilot, and I would also explain my accent. I'm so sorry about this. I've been working on this for a very long time. It's not going anywhere. But more seriously, we basically launched a pilot program in partnership with the French embassy and several French institutions to support Ivorian entrepreneurs within the CGECI sector. So basically, we feel that it's important in the way we provide that support to go back to the first question that you asked.
Yes.
What are the sort of like obstacles within the ecosystem? I mean, if we don't get that right, there is no way in even trying. So we started by conducting a study on the CGECI sector in Cote d'Ivoire. And then we prioritized, going back to the very first question that we asked, we realized very quickly that we had to basically pick subsectors that we felt had more potential than others to pick up. So we prioritized 3 subsectors, and within the subsectors, we identified through a highly rigorous and transparent selection process a cohort of 12 entrepreneurs that would support over the next 6 months. And basically the idea there, when we say support, it's by providing them, as I said, with the intelligent capital, the right mix of technical assistance and financing, but also connecting them to markets, connecting them to knowledge, connecting them to expertise. It's still, if you take the Cote d'Ivoire, it's still a very sort of like nascent industry, and like it's almost like the entire value chain has to be like support and or constructed. So that's the journey we've embarked on with the clear view. I mean, you asked about the scope. Usually the way we operate, we always start by pilot. I mean, we want to get this right. The next phase for us would basically to scale this program across 3 to 5 African countries.
All right, great. I mean, we've talked a lot about policy already, and you know, at the end of the day, the economic and political scenery of every single country would need to be accommodative for these businesses to thrive. So, what, in your opinion, would be the key moves that governments would need to make across Africa just to ensure that businesses thrive, this industry thrives, especially on the African continent?
Mm-hmm. How can governments support better?
That's an excellent question. To me, there is definitely, it might seem like a small thing, but just sort of like acknowledging more the role and potential of this industry would be huge. I mean, I don't want to get into the technicalities of specific roles and regulation, but I mean, as you would know, I mean, leadership sort of most of the time set up the tempo, the music. So basically, is that really a priority? Is it like a buzzword, or have we actually internalized the potential of these economies? And is this something we actually believe in? I think if our leadership was to acknowledge and signal this clearly, that alone would make a difference. And I think what would cascade down from there is basically a set of laws and regulation that would basically allow that industry to thrive. And I mean, I don't want to get into the detail, because if I would like to link my answer back to the first question you asked. How do we even define CGECI? Maybe at the country level, we ought to pick like specific subsectors that we aim to push, and then have the right laws and regulation and policies that apply. We think, and that's more building on our competitiveness practice, it's actually extremely important to be focused and intentional, and pushing CGECI agenda with all the subsectors that encompass, be like, at least at the country level, sort of like too much to swallow. So I guess step number one would be to prioritize what are the subsectors that we feel have the most potential within each country. Acknowledge that potential, and then look at the very sort of very specific obstacles that need to be removed for these subsectors to grow and thrive. And I think we need to sequence the approach. And then again, so that's at the country level, but I think also, and what we've been seeing at the continental level is encouraging and ought to be supported further, but beyond reports and presentation and or Zoom presentation, I guess that's what I mean. How do we increase cooperation? I think it's great that we're working with folks like and keen to see basically more cooperation between Ivorian entrepreneurs and Nigerian entrepreneurs, for example, within that space.
Right, fantastic. And talking about collaboration, that's something that can totally make young African creatives have more power, bargaining power, have more reach, have more impact. Now, this brings me to a very critical question. Now, a lot of young Africans have always complained about cultural appropriation or exploitation. So we've had issues where, big Hollywood filmmakers, for example, or artists would make, unique stories about unique African culture, for example, right? And then there's no credit, there's no involving of young Africans in these productions. So they exploit it strictly for Hollywood, and they go on to make millions and billions of dollars. We also have that in the music industry, where you have sounds unique to a particular tribe or culture in Africa, and these sounds are appropriated and exploited by big Hollywood stars as well, right? And they go viral, and it feels like Africans are just left out, and they're being exploited all over again. So what can young Africans do, African creatives rather, do to benefit of their sounds, their unique cultural elements being used by people from around the world? How can they just not be burnt? How can they partake from the glory?
Michael, can I be non-politically correct?
Okay, please do.
I think we need to stop complaining. I think we just need to take matters in hand, basically, and I've been having this conversation, and I'm a young African myself. Yeah. I think basically it's for us to basically take ownership, basically like tell our stories and realize what are soft spots. I mean, if we need to partners with folks to basically make that happen, like let's not be afraid. Let's go and let's explore basically what are our gaps. I mean, we know we have the talent, we know we have the story. We want to be the one telling that stories, but we also need to look at basically what is it that we're missing. I mean, I was talking to a very good friend of mine, is an artist, and we had this whole I asked him the exact same question actually, and that was like 2 weeks ago. And he said, listen, we're not good at storytelling. I mean, we have the stories, but we don't understand yet the codes, like the Hollywood codes. We haven't internalized them. So we need to make sure that we basically bridge this gap. And I think one way to bridge the gap, I mean, number one for me would definitely be to stop complaining and to go and get it. I mean, why don't we make more partnerships with like firms in Hollywood? And then how do we build this sort of use these first experiences to acquire and transfer the knowledge and make sure that we raise the game? You see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much, Mr. Ted Roux. Guys, we have been talking to Ted Roux, who is manager at ESPartners. Thank you so much for making our time to talk to us and have this great conversation with us this morning.
Thank you.
Pleasure being with you all, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to keep that conversation going. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you. Have a nice day.